Hi class, welcome back. So we're still in week 4 and lesson 4.2, and in the last video we introduced you to the Challenge to Biology Spiral, and now we're going to talk about using the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral. And of course what you're going to hear is quite similar to what you heard for the Biology to Design, but as I mentioned in that video, you're not going to be using that one for the rest of the course, although it's really nice to know about. You're really going to be focusing on the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral. So I'm going to spend a little more time in this video explaining each step and some of the nuances behind it. And as I explained in the introduction, we're going to be using the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral that looks like this, or there's another one that's quite similar. Well, there's 3 of them that are quite similar, but I like this one because it's color-coded here. You really distinctly see the arrows going in an outward direction, and I think it's real clear what each of the steps are, and that you keep repeating these steps at every time you spiral around. If you find another one that you're more comfortable with, go ahead and use that, but I'm going to be talking off of this one. And recall, the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral is used in most design situations. And again, I use that term design really broadly, so whether you're an architect, a graphic designer, whether you're a designer of policies, government policies sort of a thing, you really can use it for any sort of design. And with that sort of design in mind, you start out with a problem, or what we're calling a challenge, and you use a Challenge to Biology Design Spiral to come up with a solution that's inspired by nature. Okay, so you take your challenge to biology in order to come up with your solution. And again, that's in contrast to the Biology to Design, which is more for an invention sort of a process, where you're inspired by a solution you see in nature and use the Biology to Design Spiral to come up with a problem that then you'll look to solve. So examples, we talked about the Bionic car by Mercedes that was inspired by both the shape and the internal structure of the boxfish. We talked about Qualcomm's Mirasol display that uses less energy to get brighter and more colorful display using the strategy of the Morpho butterfly, which is a structural color approach, and the building in Zimbabwe by Michael Pierce, that it itself becomes a whole heating and cooling ventilation system as opposed to having an individual, a huge HVAC system. And that's inspired by the giant termite mounds that you find in Africa and the strategy that they use to keep a constant temperature year-round. The steps in the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral are identify, translate or interpret, discover, abstract, emulate, and evaluate. I think I skipped one here when I was going around. So they're real similar to the Biology to Design Spiral steps, but they're in a different order, of course, because instead of starting with biology, you're starting with your challenge. We're going to go through each of these steps and then talk about putting them together. Okay, identify. In the identify step, the goal here is to identify the real challenge behind the design brief, or whatever your starting point is, and to distill the design functions. And we talked about that earlier, the idea of getting down to functions. And that's what happens in the very first, or identify step of the Challenge to Biology Design Spiral. So again, it's getting beyond thinking about what it is you want to design, and instead come up with what you want your design to do. So instead of saying, hey, what do I want to design, with the focus on the what, the thing, the preconceived notion about what that design is, you're already coming up with a solution when you ask that question. Instead, you focus on what you want your design to do, and you relentlessly ask yourself, why do you want your design to do that, and why do you want to do that? And you irritatingly ask yourself that question until you get down to this list of functions. So here's an example. Let's say someone comes to you and said, oh yeah, we need you to design us a new water filter. And your question would be, well, what's the real challenge here? Well, the water filters at our factory clog up and they're expensive to replace. Well, why, you might ask then, in this why do the filters clog? And the answer might be because they filter all the particulates from the water and algae grows on them. And then you might ask, well, why are the filters filtering all the particles? And the answer is, well, because we have to filter all of them, because the toxic materials that are the most concerned are the very smallest. So you've got to get the big ones out and all the way down to the smallest. And the question would be, well, why does algae grow on them? Well, because it's wet and the tank is outside in the sunlight, and algae likes to grow. So then you get down to, okay, so you want to design something that can remove small toxic materials from the water, right? And algae is a secondary problem. So you're getting down to the function, instead of saying, oh, designing a water filter. You've already got embedded in that design solution. You want to break out of that and open up the possibilities, open up your design space in this identify stage. Now, one of the things, and I'll say this a couple times in this course, I think I've said it already, if you do nothing else with this whole course but get better at identifying the real challenge and distilling down your real design functions, those core functions, you will become a better designer. Now, this might sound super obvious, like, well, if I'm designing something, of course I'm going to know what it is I want my design to do. But the fact is, in the real world, designers often don't have the luxury of spending time identifying, or it just doesn't occur to them to do that, because of course I know what I want to design. I want to design a water filter. I want to design a chair. And it doesn't even occur to you to say, well, why do I want to design a chair? What does I really want that chair to do? What many purposes is this chair serving? That alone will make you a better designer and make you a better sustainable designer. So this is a really key step for being a more innovative designer too. Okay, so the next step, and we touched on this in the last one with the biology to design, is the translate or interpret step. And this is when you take those functions that you identified and translate them into biological terms, biological expressions, translate them so that a biologist, for example, would understand them. While you're translating the functions that you've identified into biology, you also want to translate your design operating conditions into habitat conditions. So the whole thing is this little transformation or translate and interpret step. You go from identifying your functions, which are still associated with your design concept, and translating them into the world of biology. And that's how you're going to get into the biological world. You know you've been successful, and if you can ask the question, how does nature, and you can fill in any sort of organism here, do that function, whatever the function is. So if you can say, how does a hummingbird moderate temperature? Okay, that makes sense. So moderating temperature is your function. You could put darn near anything, any organism in there, and that would make sense. How does an ecosystem maintain temperature? Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's a question that's valid to a biologist's ears. So you know you've gotten the function and you've gotten the translation right when you could create a question that makes sense. That might make you need to reframe the question. It might make you revisit the identify step until you get that right. And again, you want to also define habitat conditions that reflect your design parameters. Sometimes that's quite literal, hot and dry, for example. Sometimes it's more metaphorical. It's a very resource-rich environment. So if you're working in a big city with lots of people and lots of action and lots of money and resources, and well, that's a dynamic, resource-rich environment, right? So that's metaphorical. So when you look into nature, what's a dynamic, resource-rich environment? It might be a rainforest, for example, okay, as opposed to Arctic, where you've got a very slow, resource-poor environment, for example, okay? At this stage, although it's only the second stage of the spiral, it also helps to start translating life's principles into design parameters. We actually touch on that. We get to that in the evaluate stage towards the end, like you did last week. But it's a nice spot to start to think about them so you don't have to wait till the very end to weave them in. Okay? Okay, I was going to say also reframing the question. It helps to ask questions in forward and reverse. Instead of saying, how does nature keep warm? It might be, how does nature keep cool? So you can turn the question around, or how does nature not keep warm? Instead of how does nature keep cool? So you play with reframing the questions in a few ways, substituting different bits of nature, whether it's an individual organism, a species, a system, and then different versions of that function. That'll help you open up your your design process when you get to the discover phase. So in the discover phase, this is where people have the most fun, and hopefully you've been having fun doing this so far, especially in week 2 and then during your BCI sessions. So in the discover phase, we go into nature, we go into the literature, or look at the internet, we look at media to discover the best natural models for the functions that we're trying to perform under the parameters or within the habitat conditions that we want. So at the end of this step, we will have created a list of natural models and strategies to perform the functions that we want to perform under the conditions we need to perform them in. Okay, so the idea is you discover natural models, strategies, and not just one, but you seek many models and strategies. The more you seek, the better off you'll be. Again, bursting open your design space, your solution space, and very much about divergent thinking, okay? So you can go outside. You can consider both literal and metaphorical models. So it doesn't have to be, you know, only looking for things in nature that do what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's metaphorical. So if you start out with, how do I design a better vacation policy for my employees? Well, of course, such a thing doesn't exist. So you might need to go back and redefine your function. So what does vacation mean? You know, what is vacation for? And you won't find literal examples necessarily, but you will find metaphorical examples. So just like when you design anything, you don't have to literally take something. You can take the essence of something or a metaphorical model. Again, you want to comb the literature, whether it's scientific journals, books, websites, or things like Discovery Channel. Okay, there's all kinds of media out there. And again, we talked about same thing with biology to design. Brainstorm with biologists, and this time it's going to be a really interesting conversation because you know exactly what you're looking for, and the biologist will be, wow, I have never thought about it that way. And together you can co-creatively discover things that neither one of you would have thought to look for before. And this is when Ask Nature comes in super handy. So when you actually have a function that you can type in there, Ask Nature will come up with different versions of that of solutions, natural models, and also organisms that express that. And just be sure you remember that Ask Nature is not the end all. It would love to be the end all and have all organisms in there, but it has just a small percentage of them. So look at that as a great starting point. If you find something in Ask Nature, that can then in turn help you look in these other sources for even more organisms that perform the function that you want. When you're going through all these different sources, some things you want to do is find what we call champion adapters. So what organism or system, what organism's survival depends on what it is I want to do. Okay, so if you're trying to keep something warm, well, go to the Arctic, right? Or keeping from getting warm, you might look to the desert, right? So you can go to extreme conditions. So you look for organisms that are really challenged, who it would be really hard to maintain that function. Okay. You can so we talked about looking at extreme habitats. You can turn the problem inside out and on its head, like we said before. So if you're looking at a way to dry out humid air, you could consider looking in the desert and how do you extract little bits of water from the air. Okay, so it's for certain, like the Namibian beetle, for example, it's able to extract water in a place where it never rains. So another example is when you're looking for a way, say, to retard fire combustion. Maybe you look for oxygen scavengers in bottom-dwelling pond organisms. Okay, so instead of how do you keep oxygen from getting to something, well, how do you get oxygen out of something? Okay. And then when you're done, again, you're going to create a list of models and strategies and start to organize that list. Create a taxonomy of all the strategies that you're finding. And from this organized list, certain patterns and principles will emerge, and you can start to find the most promising strategies that do what you want to do under the conditions that you are looking to work with. When you get to the abstract phase, again, once you have the biological models, okay, so now you're fully immersed in the world of biology, you're going to go to the process in reverse. So you want to turn those biological strategies into technical strategies. So you're basically reverse engineering the strategy. You're going from biology to the technical world, okay, which is exactly the opposite, if you remember, what you did in the translate and interpret phase, okay? So you're going in reverse. Now you've got your solutions. You want to bring them back into the world of design and engineering. And you want to identify those strategies used to perform that function, identify the deep patterns and principles, which will start to emerge from that list, that taxonomy you created. So you want to describe those strategies using technical terms. So if you were talking to a fellow designer, a fellow architect, a fellow engineer, a fellow whoever, and showed them what you came up with, they would have no clue that you got your strategy from the biological world. That's when you know you've been successful. And again, in addition to the specific strategies used by a single organism, you want to look at lots of them and start to look what patterns and principles are emerging from your list, because that's when you get the real gems, and that's when you're going to most easily be able to abstract it and bring it into your design. And again, at this point, you want to create a taxonomy of nature strategies, and this time they're going to be in technical terms. So once you have abstracted all those different strategies, or maybe just one, now it's time to put on your designer's hat, and it's time to design. That's what the emulate stage is all about. So how are you going to emulate what that organism or how nature performs those functions in your design? All right, so when you're doing biomimetic design, remember that you're still doing design, all right? So whatever form of design that you're doing, biomimetic design adds this front end of really helping you pick apart your design more in an identify stage, and then allows you to find a whole new world of potential solutions that are radical, innovative, and sustainable, right? But you bring them back through the abstract stage, and now it's time to do design, okay? And however you do design, do that with this new set of strategies and concepts, all right? And when you have those, brainstorm multiple solutions. Go ahead and be, divergent here. Come up with all kinds of different ways that you could use the strategy. Try to meet multiple functions with your design or with each strategy. And as you're doing that, you might want to refer back to your discover phase and consider what we call chimera designs. And that's when you take solutions or strategies from wildly different parts of the natural world and put them into your designs. You could have something from polar bear and something from a tomato plant. Humans are able to do that. It's one difference between humans and everybody else. Everyone else is kind of at the can only evolve, right? They can only evolve from where they are into their next phase. We can mix and match anything because we've got a brain that allows us to do that. That's what chimera designs mean. When you get to this stage, you can rely on your own biological knowledge the first time around, just to kind of get a picture of what's going on. But when you're really getting into the design stage, you're going to need to consult with a biological expert so you get that functioning right. Otherwise, you could think you're getting it right, but miss, again, the real core innovative, sustainable solution that you really are seeking. And you want to go back to your model and explore more strategies. So like we saw with the boxed fish and the Mercedes-Benz car. At first they went out looking for a more aerodynamic form, and they got that, and they said, wow, what else could I do? Learn from the boxed fish. And they learned about how you create a much more efficient and effective internal structure. So go back to your model and explore more strategies. And at this stage, you want to have a lot of fun at the beginning, but again, we're not only in this course to come up with really creative designs, but we want really effective designs. When you're doing this emulation, and also in the abstract phase, be really aware that you have in nature, you've got materials to play with, forms, processes, and systems. A lot of nature. If you want to emulate nature, you might find that your design doesn't actually perform the function that you need. Your design may figure out a way to tap into allowing the system to perform that. Okay, and that's what almost all of our our smartphones and our apps are all about the thing, your unit itself doesn't do the function, it taps into a system that performs the function. And like you did last week, you get to your evaluate stage. You evaluate or compare your design against life's principles. And you ask the questions. Does your design adapt and evolve? And all the other sort of life's principles that goes with that. And does your design create conditions conducive to life and all the different parts of the life's principles structure that goes along with that, okay? And as you discovered, that alone, I hope you discovered this, that alone will lead you to asking new questions that you never would have thought to ask before at the beginning of your design process. So it's really important to think about what have you learned, not just in the evaluate stage, but from the whole process, from going through all those different organisms, and how can you improve your design. And because it's a spiral, that first set of steps is only the beginning. You whip through the first part really quickly, okay? So you run through it and you go, oh, now I understand what I should be designing, identifying those functions. And you go through again, and then you learn, you go, oh, now I know what I can pick up on a new function. I can understand a different set of models to look for. So you go around again and again. So as you go through those first set of those steps, the first time, remember, whip through them quickly, get some ideas, learn, and then go through them again. Okay, so those are the steps, and that's the idea of going through them again and again. I'm going to have one more video for you in this lesson, and that's all about just spirals. It's the beauty of spirals, why the spiral process and the spiral approach is so important, and I'll try and keep that a little shorter. And then you're going to read what we talked about here, so you'll have a reference, the text version of what we just talked about. And then after that, you're going to do your assignment 4.2 is to come up with a challenge to biology design. And what you're going to design is a coat or a jacket that can be worn outside, that performs functions that it needs to perform outside. And I sincerely hope that it will be far more functional and attractive than what these girls are wearing here. Okay, that's it. This has been a long one. It's a really important part of this course is understanding the challenge to biology design spiral and how to use it. So I hope you have a great time playing with it, and I will see you in the next video.